Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. Today we're going to talk about comparison. Is it the thief of joy for wildlife photographers? Right after this. In the intro to this, I referenced a pretty famous quote attributed to Theodore Roosevelt, although if you Google it, I'm not sure that he actually ever said it. But it's a pretty famous quote that just talks about comparison being the thief of joy. I ran this on my Instagram page. I talked about it a little bit. I got a lot of responses to it. And this is a theme that I've had over and over the last few years. People that tell me about how it produces anxiety with them, how it often leads to frustration. A true story. I've received several messages from people who quit social media and gave up on wildlife photography entirely based upon the pressure that they felt and sometimes the inferiority that they felt about themselves as photographers. And I wanted to explore that a little bit in this video. Now, I will tell you, this is one of those thought videos. I don't have a script here. As the kids would say, this one's off the dome. I'm literally just going to talk about it, but give me 5 minutes. The video will probably be about 15. Give me 5 minutes and see if I still hold your attention. Over on the side, I may flash some quotes or some sayings or even some images up there just to hold your attention. But talking head video like this, I'm just going to ask you to bear with me. I thought about this a lot over the last few days, and I wanted to put those thoughts down into 3 categories. The first category is just expectations. The second category is what are the reasons that we actually do this? Why do we actually get involved with wildlife photography? And the third one is going to be about comparison itself. So let's start with expectation. I've been in management for a long time. I don't do anything highly important, but I've been doing it for a long time. I get a lot of young managers in, and one of the conversations I typically have with people at some point is about expectation. I actually believe this is true, not just in the workplace, personal relationships, conflict, mediation. A lot of this has to deal with expectation. I typically tell a story that sounds something like this. I'm coming into work one day and I call ahead and I say, hey, what's it look like? And first response I get is, it looks amazing. Everything's really great. We're in great shape. And I walk in the building and this is a little out of place. That's not right. This is a little off. I'm pretty critical. And I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty disappointing. I expected to see everything perfect and it's not. So I'm disappointed. And it affected my mood. It changed my perception for the day. I started the day on a bad note. Now, the second scenario, I call ahead and they say, it's rough today. Had some call outs. We're doing our best, but it's not looking great right now. And I walk in and it's the same place. It's the same building. The environment hasn't changed from the first scenario. And I look around and I say, oh, this isn't too bad. We can deal with this. And my mood is actually better. Now, nothing changed. Physical environment is the exact same. The only difference is my expectation of what I would see when I walked in. And that expectation set me up in the first scenario for disappointment, and it set me up in the second scenario to feel better about myself or better about the way the day was going to go. And it changes my outlook on that morning. And I will tell you, think about that because I bet you it's true. How does this relate to wildlife? And how does it relate to photography? I think sometimes as wildlife photographers, especially in those first few years, we have very unrealistic expectations. What we think we are going to become and what we think we're going to produce sometimes flattens out. It takes a long time to get good at anything. This is going to deal with our second thing in just a minute, the reasons we actually do it. But when we expect ourselves to be great and we start to realize we're not, it sets us up for disappointment. And I'm not sure it's realistic to think that any wildlife photography, especially in those first few years, is going to consistently be great because there's a learning curve involved. And with wildlife photography, unlike a lot of other genres, it's not just learning how to use the equipment. That's part of it. It's also studying the behavior, studying the environments, and most importantly, putting yourself in the field for a lot of time because time often produces the best visual images. Now, the second concept I wanted to explore is our goals. Why are we doing this? I think there's a couple of buckets. I think the easiest way is to group them into big categories. So let's say intrinsic versus extrinsic. The intrinsically motivated people might be interested in nature itself. They may get up in the morning and just love to be in nature, and they want to take pictures that just capture the moments. I did a video on the 4 archetypes of photographers, and these may often be the sharers. These are people that just like to experience it and put it back out there. And what I think I've noticed over the years is that this group of people typically stays with it almost indefinitely, because it's not just about the finished result that drives their motivation. It's about just being out there and connecting with nature. And they'll continue to do it when you enjoy the process, when you enjoy nature for what it is, when you enjoy wildlife for what it is, you are much more apt to do it for a long period of time. Now, when you're motivated the other way, extrinsically, so you're motivated by popularity, by likes, by comments, by followers, maybe even by things like contests or the final product. That's what really matters. That can put a lot more pressure on you. And again, it gets back to this concept of what is realistic. If you are motivated by those extrinsic things and they're not coming to you, there's a good chance you're going to stop doing it. I see so many wildlife photographers, and you could plot it out on a curve between 3 and 4 years. The first couple of years is exciting. You're growing, you're getting popular, you're seeing comments, you're actually seeing improvement in your work. And then that improvement starts to flatten out. And this is true of any learning curve that's out there. Those tiny incremental improvements take so much more time at the end. I had kids that played high-level sports. Their progress in the beginning was pretty apparent. You could see it almost day by day. But after years and years and years of doing this, those little teeny improvements were hard to come by. In fact, it took hundreds of hours to train to make those small little improvements, an extra inch, an extra centimeter, a little stronger. It just took a lot of time and commitment. And I don't think we're all realistic about our goals. Let's say I've been shooting wildlife for a few years and I'm getting a lot of comments and people are liking it, and I think I'm really, really good at it. And I say my goal is now to be the best at it. That's my goal. How much time and energy does it take to be the best at something? Now, if I've got a full-time job, if I'm a parent and I'm doing this on the weekends, good luck. That is just not a realistic goal to be the best. Again, the expectation, I'm setting an expectation, not based in reality. If I can only give you Saturday and Sunday as a wildlife photographer, and I'm learning on YouTube and I'm trying to learn how to edit in Photoshop, and I'm trying to put the time out into the field to become great, there's a good chance I'm just setting myself up for failure. So again, when my goal is to be highly successful, am I willing? Am I willing to do it and be committed to it? Because if you want to be great at something, there's no shortcuts. You can buy the $20,000 setup. That's not going to make you a great wildlife photographer. What's going to make you a great wildlife photographer is actually the time invested in the field. And that time, it can be very, very overwhelming. So I want you to think about that. Are my goals as a wildlife photographer realistic? And can I achieve those goals? But if your goal immediately in the first couple of years you're doing it is to be the best at something, I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment. Again, going back to expectations. Is it realistic to expect in your first few years of doing something that you are going to be great at it? Probably not. Can you set goals that are more realistic and goals that are attainable? Maybe even goals that aren't performance-based. Maybe goals are, do I feel happy doing this? Does this bring me joy? If those are your goals, those are goals anybody can achieve. So think about that as well. Are your goals realistic? And where are you at in terms of your career or your tenure, how long you've been doing this? And are the goals you're setting for yourself even realistic? When our goal is to be connected to nature and appreciate wildlife, we're more likely to do it. When our goal is to maintain likes and followers and comments, or our goal is to enter contests and win, it becomes a lot tougher to do. And when we start to fail, we are much more likely to give it up. I would love to see wildlife photography for those involved be a lifelong commitment, because I think it's a wonderful hobby. It's something that connects us to nature. There's a challenge to it. There's a skill involved. There's this long learning curve. And I think it's a wonderful hobby. I would love to see people commit to it lifelong. But again, I've seen so many people leave right around that 3rd and 4th year and often never come back to it. Now, Part of the reason that they quit, and part of the reason that they get frustrated, is this third component. Started this video with the quote, "Comparison is the thief of joy," and I have this concept called the comparison trap. We often fall into this. Social media amplifies it. I think it is rooted some way in a lot of us, just in the way we're born. Some of us are competitive. I am. It helps to actually make me a better photographer, but it's not always healthy. So I think we have to be realistic about where we're at and what our goals are, set realistic expectations, and then realize, who are we comparing ourselves to, especially when it comes to social media. And give you some examples. Around 4 or 5 years I'd been doing wildlife photography. I actually thought I was getting pretty good. I wasn't, but I thought I was getting pretty good. I would compare myself at that point as a person working a full-time job. I would often compare myself to people who were professional wildlife photographers. They were out there 5 days a week on their own time, often traveling to the best locations. I still compare myself sometimes to people who are professional wildlife photographers, or who may just be in a different situation. Somebody who's traveling the world. I'll mention a couple photographers here, people that I really admire and I still look up to, and I still fall into the comparison trap. Melissa Grew, who's a friend of mine, she messaged me recently and was talking about this amazing trip she had and how exciting it was and all the things she did. I thought, God, I'd like to do that. I'm jealous, and I totally am. It's not realistic for me to compare my work to somebody who does this full time and has opportunities that I just don't. It's not fair. Josh Galicki is a photographer. I've mentioned him several times. He is an amazing photographer, and I often find myself trying to compare myself to him. Now, he is not a professional full-time photographer, so I'm actually extra jealous, but he may be doing things that I just don't have the ability to do. Here's the other thing I need to accept at some point. Sometimes they just may have talents that I don't, and I still fall into that trap. I will tell you this. I've had people message me and say, Scott, I compare myself to you. I look at you and say, I'm not as good as you. How come? Here's why. You've been doing it for 2 years, and I've been doing it for 10. And I don't have kids. I'm out there 3 days a week. I have a flexible work schedule that lets me do a lot of photography. So if I'm out there 3 days a week for 10 years, you shouldn't compare yourself to me. You're out there once a week as somebody raising kids and working a full-time job, and you've been doing it for 2 or 3 years. Don't compare yourself to me. It's not fair. So what's the best comparison? I think, first of all, let's be realistic about who we are comparing ourselves to. If we're comparing ourselves to somebody who's a full-time wildlife photographer with $20,000 worth of gear and travels all over, it's pretty tough. You are setting yourself up for failure. Let's get back to that first concept of expectation. Your expectations aren't realistic. If you're comparing yourself to yourself, it's a fair comparison. So I often just challenge people, look back a year ago and look at your images now. Are they better? And is that your goal? If your goal is to be great at wildlife photography and take better images, just understand it's a journey and it takes time. There aren't shortcuts. The best images come from time in the field, period. Yes, there's a lot of learning. Yes, there's skill involved. But at the end of the day, for wildlife photography, your time in the field is what is most critical. And it is just an investment. It's not going to come fast. You're going to get some good images in there. But it's not going to be consistent when you're out there year after year after year. And I have videos all over the place. I have some about locations and how important locations are. Again, it's just when you learn these things and you put the time in, you actually will start to see improvement. I'm going to show you some images here. I'll try to find the same species. My first year of photography, my second year of photography, and then the last 2 or 3 years of photography, the same. I mean, look at some of the differences. For the first couple of years, some of these actually I thought at the time were pretty good. And I'm looking at other people thinking, hey, maybe I could be good at this one day. Maybe I could be great at this one day. If I had stopped and just compared myself to other people, I probably would have just failed. My goal was just to be better against myself every day. And I am fortunate that I am capable of looking at other people for inspiration with realistic expectations. So yes, I do look at some photographers and say, God, that's good. Man, I wish I could be like that. It's a good feeling for me personally, and I will share this. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I've become very comfortable with myself in terms of photography. People may not like it, and I've grown to really not care. I've developed a style that I like. I developed things that work for me. I've been able to teach others how to do it, and I feel really good about where I'm at. And it's a really good feeling when you're not always worried about the pressures that come from being accepted. So for those of you out there that are struggling with this, just think about this. A couple concepts. Are you realistic? And I would say that's a big thing. Are you realistic with your expectations? Are you realistic about your goals? And are you realistic about your comparisons? Who you're comparing yourself to? Understanding that the best person to compare yourself to is always going to be last year's version of yourself. So I hope you hung in there for this whole video. Again, a little bit more of an opinion piece, just kind of thought-provoking. Love to know your thoughts down in the comment. I'm enjoying these videos where I'm just talking for a few minutes and then soliciting comments to get your feedback. I love to get your feedback. So down in the comments, here's what I'd like to know. Have you experienced this comparison trap? Have you ever been in situations where you just felt like you're not good enough? And is it largely based on social media? Think about that. Are you improving in your photography, and is that your goal? Again, if your goal is to be better, are you willing to make the sacrifices to do it? Nothing's easy, nothing's free. Everything takes time and energy. So if you do want to be better, do you have the time and energy to be involved in it? And I would also question, does it bring you joy? Like, what's the motivation? Again, what's the goal? What's the motivation? Does it still bring you joy? And I'm hoping that it still does. 9.5 years later, I'm happy to say it still brings me joy. And I appreciate you watching the video today. I appreciate your support on the channel as always. And I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.